Welcome. As we continue our examination of a fictionalized account of a 15-year-old murderer I once saw, I'd like to share with you a lesson I learned from this young man's mother. As troubled as she was, she taught me some things. The day came when Raymond Davis's mother, Cheryl, made her way to Waco and presented in court for the first time. As she stood before the judge next to her son's attorney, Phil Celestine, and also the prosecutor, Robin Murphy, and Raymond's probation officer, Cheryl looked out of place. I sat in the gallery and watched. "Is this a family member?" asked Judge. "It's my client's mother, Your Honor," said the boy's attorney. Judge Collier, kind man that he is, smiled on Cheryl. "Welcome. Did you come a long way?" "By bus from Oklahoma," she said. "I've never been to Waco, Texas." "Do you have accommodations while you're here?" the good judge inquired. "The Salvation Army." The judge nodded. "So what's our status, Mr. Celestine?" "We're still in the process of collecting discovery. I have all available documents from the prosecutor, but we're waiting on some old records from one of his prior treatment centers." Robin Murphy, the prosecutor, added, "Your Honor, we've gotten most of our evidence, but in addition to some of the defendant's psychiatric records, there's a report pending from the medical examiner's office." Without looking at me, Judge Collier said, "I see Dr. Carter is in the courtroom. Where is he in his evaluation of your client, Mr. Celestine?" "We're making good progress, Your Honor. In fact, Dr. Carter's meeting with my client and his mother right after this hearing to go into further depth about the family's history." That was news to me, but inwardly I applauded Phil for his quick thinking. I really looked forward to the thought of meeting jointly with this mother and son. After the brief hearing came to a close, I slipped out of the courtroom to make my way inside the juvenile jail. The detention superintendent, Mr. Hines, whispered to me as I walked by him, "I'll bring him to you in a minute." Upon Mr. Hines' directives, I met Raymond in a holding room just off the short corridor to the courtroom. A jailer brought 3 plastic chairs and placed them in a triangle. "Why don't you sit right there, Raymond?" I said to him. I took the chair furthest from the steel door and left empty the seat next to my juvenile client. "Your mother will be here in a minute." Whether he was nervous or anxious or excited or embarrassed or what, Raymond dropped his shackled self into his seat and stared straight at the floor. "Are you all right?" I asked. Raymond said nothing. I too took a seat as Raymond awaited his mother. Momentarily, unfamiliar footsteps clattered against the concrete floor. I saw Mr. Hines motion, and Cheryl appeared in the doorway. Cheryl first looked at her boy, then at me. "Can I hug him?" she asked me. Mr. Hines stood behind Cheryl and offered one nod of the head. In turn, I did the same to this pitiable mother. Walking slowly toward her only child, Cheryl placed her hand under his right elbow. Raymond instinctively stood, though his eyes stayed stuck to the floor. His mother wrapped herself like a shawl around his neck and shoulders. His hands were chained to his waist, but he touched her hips and made his body lean forward. Folding his head over her shoulder, he closed his eyes. His lips quivered. From my stance 3 or 4 feet away, I absolutely felt the strength of this mother's grip as she hugged, then squeezed her only son. Mr. Hines disappeared from view, though I assume a jailer, maybe 2 or 3, stood nearby. If she had any inhibitions, Cheryl tossed them aside for the next few minutes. Trying at first to keep her emotions together, she failed as tears trickled and then streamed down her cheeks. The bones in her body surely shook with passion. Soon, an adoring maternal cry swelled into a wailing fit before settling into a mournful, if not melodious, moan. Honestly, it was sweet, really sweet. Surely conflicted by guilt or shame or embarrassment, maybe even a bit of machismo, Raymond didn't seem to know how to respond to his mother's sentiment. Given that she had failed him in so many ways, he probably wasn't quite sure what to feel. Still, in that very moment, it surely felt good to be held by a parent in a way he'd not experienced in many years. Too many years. For the next 15 minutes or so, mother and son caught up with one another. I didn't say a single word. In time, Cheryl turned her attention to me and peppered me with questions, heavy questions. She wanted to know if Raymond faced the death penalty. I assured her he did not. She wanted to know how old he might be when he got out of prison. I told her I couldn't answer that question. She wondered how well I knew the prosecutor and if I had any sway in the plea agreement process. She told me she wished she could go to prison for Raymond because it was her fault for raising him up so awfully. Raymond told her to hush up. I've had the experience, and probably so have you, of hearing people vocally plea for help. Make something happen. Keep something from happening. Turn a bad situation good. Give me answers. Tell me everything's going to be okay, even though you and I both know it won't. In the spring semester of 1976, I entered graduate school. I was appointed to be the graduate assistant of Dr. Bill Lambert, a psychologist who would ultimately direct my dissertation and become one of my dearest friends. He died a few years ago, and I was invited by his family to speak at his funeral. I noted then that Dr. Lambert's name was right at the top of my top 10 list of influential people. In my very first semester of graduate school, Dr. Lambert issued to me one of many axioms I now try to follow. It's not your job to fix things. It seemed odd to me that a young psychologist in training should be told by a seasoned psychologist to avoid taking ownership of other people's personal affairs. It's not your job to fix things. To say the obvious, how people listen to one another determines the quality of their interactions. If you believe I'm the ultimate authority figure, you'll certainly treat me with some degree of respect, and the same thing holds true in reverse. If we believe things are black and white, right or wrong, we want a cheat sheet. If everything happens according to a grand scheme, we'd like a sneak preview at the blueprint. If bad things are meant to teach tough lessons, we'd like to know how many stints in detention it takes to convince a tenacious teenager that killing people ain't right. But suppose we refuse to believe all that. Suppose I believe it's not my job to fix your problems, and you believe it's not your job to fix my problems. Then I'm free to listen to you, and you're free to listen to me. And man, does that feel good. About 30 minutes into our session, Cheryl took her son's hand and scooted her chair close to him. Looking at me rather than him, she reiterated, "This is all my fault." "No, it's not, Mama," protested Raymond. Cheryl sighed and continued to look at me rather than him. "I told you when we talked that other time, I hadn't been a good mama. You don't know the half of it. My life's been rough, really rough." I cocked my head sideways, and with my eyes, I asked this mother to keep talking. "I remember the day Raymond was born," she said, looking now at Raymond and then back at me. "I was scared to death." She smiled, not because what she said was funny. She then looked at Raymond and said, "I told you I was going to be a good mama, but I wasn't." I said, "You mean you thought way back then it wouldn't be so tough raising up a little boy?" "No, I knew it would be. I knew that, but I was going to try." I told her, "I remember you told me you didn't have much help, that your mother kicked you out of her house and kept Raymond." I was recalling our first conversation we had several weeks earlier by phone. I was still a kid, 16. I planned to come back and get him when I got it together, but, you know. My guess is that Raymond didn't know much about his early history with his mother, but it quickly became evident that she was about to enlighten him. Cheryl held the floor, and I could think of no real reason she should relinquish it. Raymond again closed his eyes. Apparently not caring that her son was about to hear the ugly truth about her, Cheryl said, I met up with this man who was worse than Raymond's father, and he started pimping me out. At first it was all right because I was making a little money. Besides, I didn't mind it. I mean, well, it's not always bad work. Cheryl isn't the first woman to tell me that at some level she liked prostituting because of the momentary affection she felt from select Johns. When a person feels wanted even for a few moments, I suppose it meets a need. Raymond's eyes remained shut. I came to see Raymond when I could, she continued, but my mother didn't want me there. I wasn't doing no good. Now looking directly at Raymond, she said with conviction, I'm sorry, boy. Dr. Carter, said Cheryl, I feel really bad. Look at him. I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. I know you didn't, I responded. Raymond had no idea he'd end up here either. Did you, Raymond, she asked. Did you mean to kill that man? No response from the boy. The youth's eyes were now open, but a vacant glaze overtook him. No words were spoken for a solid minute. I looked alternately at Cheryl, then at Raymond. Cheryl's eyes peered steadily at her son. Over and over, she silently and forcefully telegraphed her deepest sorrow to this boy. It was the only effective way she could speak at that moment. I don't know, Mama, Raymond finally whispered. I don't know why I did it. As unsatisfying as that response was, Cheryl accepted it. Okay. I'll be damned if Cheryl didn't intuitively understand what I spent several years in graduate school learning. She made no effort to force a response from her son, no effort to drive home a point, no effort to scold a foolhardy child for his callous act. Cheryl allowed Raymond's unsatisfying explanation to stand on its own, feeling no need to fix him. By becoming emotionally one with her son, Cheryl, uncouth, ex-prostitute, ex-drug abusing Cheryl, absorbed all she could of her son's well-being. Forget the need to provide answers. Cheryl deftly entered her child's soul and momentarily became the source of blood that figured the four chambers of his heart. Cheryl stepped inside her son. At that moment, she was bigger than, apart from, and uniquely distinct from all else her boy knew. Listening is an act that changes people, if not the receiver, then the one who gives. Raymond made no request of his mother, but she enveloped him with an unrestricted brand of motherly affection. Real communication is about changing me and you, more than giving answers or demanding common sense or asking for favors. You and I can become so consumed with thoughts of turning a wounded son's misery into virtue that we risk believing we're powerful. We're not. The irony of the act of listening is that the more you focus on others' needs, the freer you are to change yourself. The greater the change in yourself, the greater your control over your destiny. And as an added bonus, people who make upward changes exert a stronger influence over others. Listening means something commanding. I'm psychologist Lee Carter. My task, your task, is not to talk the Raymond Davises of the world into doing things the way we wish it were done. Rather, our task is to better understand the mind of a hurting boy, so we can change ourselves, and in the process, become an influential force in our minuscule sector of the globe. I'll look forward to being with you again soon.